Um, I don't know about you, but it seems just like we're in crazy times, doesn't it? Just really crazy things happening in our world and here in the United States, and news that is happening here you're not expecting to happen here. Maybe in other countries that have lots of civil unrest. Maybe in those countries we would have these troubles, but. So what I thought we would do is kind of talk about how do we get here? What does this indicate to us from a biblical worldview, from a Christian worldview of what is going on? Because I don't see any of this as coincidental or just one of those things. I see this as a very clear series of events that is leading us to a specific end. And we know what the end looks like, and I think we can see that things are being set in motion to get us there. And to some degree, we're glad we're moving that direction, because the end is what we want. To some degree, we want Jesus' return. We want to be with him in heaven. We want to see eventually his kingdom on earth and what that will look like. And so the end we pray and we ask a lot at times, Lord, please come, please return. We sing about it. Even so, Lord Jesus, come. Well, between now and then, things, according to Paul, are going to go from bad to worse to horrible. Even if we believe in the rapture, what will occur to get us to that point for the world to be set up for the tribulation period, we won't recognize the world as it will look at that time, in order that the Antichrist will be able to be ready to be set up and move on to the scene. So tonight we're going to kind of put some things together and try to make sense of some things from a historical perspective. I am not a historian. I am not an expert in this. I thought I would throw out some of my ideas. It would generate some questions, maybe generate some more study on your part, because on the internet there is just a vast amount of information that's out there about the historical things we'll talk about. And maybe it'll raise some questions, and I'm at any point in our time tonight. We're not trying to get through this tonight. We will spend weeks kind of working our way through this. So if there's any questions, or maybe there's an aha moment or a puzzled moment, stop and we can talk about it. The only reason that I'm using this and recording it is because when we sent out the email that we were going to do this, I probably got 6 to 10 responses back saying, I cannot be there, just don't feel comfortable being there, but if you'll put it online, I will watch it. And so we're going to tape it. It'll be up on as a little YouTube video that'll be on our church's website. We have a little YouTube account, and so people can view it that way. I'll probably send it out as in an email so people can check it out. So I'm going to hand out a little bit of paperwork that'll kind of be our direction, at least for tonight. This may be thrown out and we do something completely different because of the conversation or interests of study. Miss Angela, you want to pass those out? There's, I think, 20 copies, so everybody should be able to get one of those. If you'd like to share, you're more than welcome to, or have one individually. If you've done any kind of study, or even just a very limited understanding of how our country was founded and the principles upon which it was founded, and read through our, Miss Angela, there's others. You'll know that there are some ideas of those founding fathers that we are a long ways away from. And the question is, how do we get here, and where are we going? I think historically we can look back and there's some things that go, that's how we got here. And then as we have as a Christian worldview in our New Testament vision, we can say, this is where we're going, and this is the things that are going to have to happen for us to get there. Our framing fathers had a very clear original understanding. And that is that John Adams, in a speech, said this: "We have no government armed with the power capable of contending with human passions, unbridled by morality and true religion. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to govern any other." The framework of the Founding Fathers was that we could govern ourselves. That was the original idea, and we no longer can, and we can see it in our streets in the United States tonight and for the past week. James Madison said, "We have staked the whole future of American civilization not upon the power of government, far from it. We've staked the future of all our political institutions upon the capacity of mankind for self-government." And what we find is when man can then no longer self-govern, then the only other option is civil government. And we'll talk about how we've come to the place where we do not want to be self-governed. We want to be civil-governed. Upon the capacity of each of us to govern ourselves, to control ourselves, to sustain ourselves according to the 10 Commandments of God. Noah Webster said, "The Christian religion in its purity is the basis, or rather the source, of all genuine freedom in government. I am persuaded that no civil government of a republican form can exist and be durable in which the principles of that religion have not a controlling influence." One of the signers of the Constitution, Morris, said, "For avoiding the extremes of despotism or anarchy, the only ground of hope must be on the morals of the people. I believe that religion is the only solid base of morals, and that morals are the only possible support of free government. Therefore, education should teach the precepts of religion and the duties of man towards God." Ronald Reagan said, "If we ever forget that we're one nation under God, we will be one nation gone under." I don't know if you saw Huckabee talk today on Fox, but he let loose on Fox News by saying, "This is not a political or a race problem. This is a sin problem. From beginning to end, what sparked this by the police officers was sinful. The response was sinful. We are a sinful people." And he went off on that. And I thought that was brilliant on his part. Yes. Yes. Correct. I think I'm pessimistic that we will ever be able to again. And I'll tell you why as we kind of go through this tonight. We're a long ways away, although these men were almost prophetic, were they not? They were prophets at this level anyway, of realizing that if we abandon the moral foundation upon which this is built, it will all crumble. Yeah, because if we can't self-govern based upon absolute truthfulness of something, in this case, biblical principles, once that's gone, then the only alternative is for a civil government to come in to be able to rule people who can't rule themselves. This all started, I mean, I'm open to discussion at this point, but from my just base examination of things, it seems to me that one of the greatest turning points of us being able to civil govern, whether we liked it or not, was what happened during the Civil War, which basically consolidated power in Washington, D.C., and told people you cannot civil govern, not even states can civil govern. Civil government will come from the federal level, and federal power was moved from the states, the individual counties, and the individual people to the federal government. It was a consolidation of power, and that was a big change. And it was maybe one of the steps leading us to where we are. We might look at the Civil War and say that was a great thing, fighting for the freedom of slaves in the South and the breaking up of an entire economy based on slavery. That was a great thing. But one of the side effects was that it centralized government power. And the original framers tried to spread that out, because the farther out that can be spread, the more easily people can self-govern. We can self-govern ourselves in Spicewood if we had control of our schools. We don't. If we had control of our law enforcement, we don't. If we had control of our taxes, we don't. All of those things have been taken from us, and so we don't civil govern those areas of our lives anymore. They've been consolidated. And that part of that happened during the Civil War. The Great Depression, though, and again, some of you might be able to speak to that more clearly, and the whole idea of the New Deal that came in, again, really consolidated government as the thing that then would dispense collective, we collectively pooled resources, and then those things were dispensed out. We came up with then the need for income taxation, and therefore then we could begin to save for people for their retirement, because we didn't think they could self-govern themselves, right? Because self-govern means for all of it, I'm responsible for myself. So that part of that was our Social Security system, and all that was kind of brought into place. And at any point, somebody jump in, because I'm not a historian. I don't have all the facts. I haven't studied this through completely, but as I understand how all that came together during the Depression, it really, again, centralized and allowed the government then to control by our willingness to give up some things, mainly our taxation and our income to their taxation. Then they could redistribute it to us when we got older, because we obviously couldn't save on our own. We needed someone else to do that for us. There were other institutions other programs that were all a part of that got people back to work. And we look at that and go, oh, that was that was great. I don't know, maybe some of you were in the New Deal era and look at that and boy, that really helped it. But it had some benefits. It looked good, like ending slavery, but it definitely consolidated power and gave more and more power and authority to the central government in Washington, D.C. After the Second World War, then all of a sudden, not only did we just have consolidation in Washington, D.C., but we had nations getting together and forming alliances that began maybe you wonder, like, how in the world did this COVID-19 thing seem to be a consolidated effort by so many nations all at the same time, all doing exactly the same thing? Well, that was the UN, the United Nations, and how they were able to, get information out, or in some cases not, right? I mean, we think that they maybe were manipulated by the Chinese, the WHO, which is part of the United Nations, right? Yeah, yes, it is a branch of the UN. And so all of that, we gave some rights and some things to that, because we wanted this protection and security that could be afforded by groups of not just groups of counties and cities and states, but now groups of nations that would come together, and that's helped consolidate this government involvement. And even in my life, I can just think of the systematic takeover of almost all of the aspects of our life. But they're very incremental, and it usually comes from a crisis. And they take advantage of the crisis, and I don't want the effects of that crisis again, so I'll give up certain rights so that government can protect me from that crisis. And we've given up a lot of things in this COVID-19 crisis. They took advantage of this crisis. And I mean, you've seen the bracelets. We watched the interview with one of the girls from Fox did the interview from the scientist in China who's developed the bracelet that they're going to insist that the Chinese people wear, that has the contract tracing information that they want of all Chinese citizens that are all in a bracelet. And we saw the bracelet. I didn't hear this. I was watching the Chinese scientist explain it to the girl on Fox News, and the requirement that And now someone who's here in Spicewood was applying for a job with one of the computer companies, and his job will be to call people and sign them up so that there can be a massive pool for contact tracing, so that if you get COVID, they've called you already and they've gotten the list of people to whom you were associated with, and therefore they can keep track of all of us and know that if you get it, they'll contact me, and they'll contact Brad, and they'll contact Dwayne, and they'll let us all know you got COVID, because they're tracking all of us and they know where we all are because you've given permission for me to give them that information. That's happening right now in our country. The computer companies, the big computer giants, have been commissioned by our nation to try to get a hold of everybody's identity and where you're moving and how you're moving, because we want to protect you. And we don't. Your iPhones already know that. Yeah. If Apple releases all that information, and then a lot of folks have not only given that information away, but they've taken little swabs and sent it into 23andMe. So now the government not only has your location, but all of your DNA information and can trace your history and your identity completely. So we've slowly just given this away because, I mean, how cool would it be to know that you have a great cousin who was the prince of some little hamlet in Ireland? Well, you didn't realize that when you did that, you just gave a pool of information to a company that's tracking all that information so that they can know everything there is to know about you, including all of your movements and your habits. And they know my habits because I went looking for motorcycle parts. And now on every single website that I go visit, guess who's advertising me? Those motorcycle part companies. Because how do they know? Well, they know I went to that motorcycle part company because I needed some parts. And now everything that comes up on my computer, that motorcycle company's still pumping in information trying to get me to buy again. This COVID-19 pandemic has been jumped on. I mean, did they jump on this like nobody's business? And we as people around the world have really accepted Big Brother that we would have rejected, but for the sake of safety and security. Oh, yes, sir. Yes. Yes. Yes, and now we don't think twice about what they do to us as we go through the airport. I've seen my image on the little screen as I'm doing this, like, wow, that's a pretty invasive little picture they just took of me. Yes. And your cars, for new cars, they can track your cars. All new cars can be, because they all have the technology in them. Whether you activate it or not, it's in your new car. And they know where that car is, and they can shut that car down. We're coming. Yes, exactly. That's the plan. These are not coincidences. Maybe the virus was not planned, maybe it was, but they sure have used it. 9/11 maybe wasn't, the United Nations didn't send those planes, but I'll tell you what, they took advantage of that in order to bring about this control. It's just been this constant controlling effort. And to some degree, it's because, I'll tell you, we'll talk about it in a minute, to some degree, we brought it on ourselves. We'll talk about that in a minute. Because what ended up happening was not only was there at the same time governmental change taking advantage of world events, but there was also social change happening religiously and philosophically in our world. It wasn't long into the last century that really they're one of the greatest influences for the social change that's happened was Darwinism, because it was that ability to have an alternative origin and therefore to dismiss the reality of God. And so as Darwinism came into play, All the historians can look back in Darwinism and see how that affected Adolf Hitler, how Darwinism affected Stalin and Lenin, how Darwinism even affected the woman who started Planned Parenthood and her understanding of Darwinism and how she put together Planned Parenthood for the purpose of advancing the superior races, which was Hitler's idea. And so Darwinism came into play. There was a man that some of you may have heard of. His name was Nietzsche. He was a philosopher, and he was the one that coined, or is reported to have coined, the term "God is dead." He was he basically said God is dead, and we killed him. And he wasn't being braggadocious. What Nietzsche was coming, as I understood that quote, and as I've listened to it or read it again and again, what he seems to have indicating is that through the course of social change, we have eliminated the need for God. He is dead. We killed him, but actually, as he continues in his dialogue, he's basically saying, heaven help us. God help us. We've killed him. God is dead. We killed him. God help us. And he predicted that the 20th century would be the most brutal, bloody century of world history. And it turned out to be so. Came First World War, Second World War, the rise of Lenin and Stalin and the massacres through Russia, the rise of the Chinese communists and the massacres. More people have been massacred in that last century than in all of world history. And it was basically, those were influenced most primarily not by Christianity, which has been labeled as the butcher. It was Darwinism that inspired all of that. And so this idea that God is dead, he is saying that in fact what we've done is we've killed him ourselves, and we really are in for it now, because he realized there is no more moral compass out there to guide and direct us. It wasn't long after he faded off the scene that we have the whole redefining of morality of the 1960s, and many of you lived through that, and I was young during that time, but we lived in the Bay Area, and I watched the craziness of the San Francisco scene as a little kid, but realizing and looking back over that, how really morality became redefined. And then in my generation, what we developed was one of the greatest social sins in all the world now is the lack of tolerance. So we've moved from an alternative origin, and then there being no need of God. And because we've been able to eliminate God, we've been able to redefine what the process of morality, and really the only morality left is to be tolerant. And we'll talk about how, and right here, talk about a little bit how the term tolerance has changed, because as the well, I'll define tolerance, and tolerance has been redefined. The Cambridge Dictionary defines tolerance as a willingness to accept behavior and beliefs that are different. That's what put together our Constitution and our Bill of Rights. You have the right to free speech, even if I completely and totally disagree with you. You have the right to worship your God as you choose to, even if I completely... Our forefathers were tolerant of religious liberty. They tolerated Islam, they tolerated Judaism, they tolerated various brands of Christianity. Not all of the colonies did originally. Some of the colonies were more religiously intolerant than the countries they left behind. The countries they left behind were insisting that they were members of the Church of England. They came over here, and some of the colonies set it up so that if you weren't a member of their church, you were banished. Just like they recreated what they left in England in some cases. But by the time the 1776 forefathers, and the Pilgrims are pretty much gone. They wanted to put together a nation that was very tolerant of all religious faiths, and that the government wouldn't get involved in determining which religion was going to be the official, but give man the freedom to worship God as he saw fit. That was tolerance. It was even these belief systems that are different from yours, although you might not agree with them or approve of them. That was the original Cambridge Dictionary definition of tolerance. That is not, and that's when you think of tolerance, many of you, we think that's what tolerance is. That when somebody, though, speaks of tolerance now, the next paragraph explains how they view that. The new tolerance is different from old tolerance. The new view of tolerance assumes that, one, there is no objective truth that can be known. Why? Because we've killed God. There is no absolute truth. We've demonstrated that is a thing of the past. So now various people groups and various people groups and perspectives do not have the truth, but only what they believe to be the truth. You will have heard this in a couple of months ago when there was testimony by a woman who was trying to bring down one of our Supreme Court nominees. And as I watched the TV coverage, I heard on many occasions the TV reporter say, that was her truth. That was his truth, as if he could have done what she said he did, and he could have done what he said he does, as if both of them were true, when they were in complete opposite contradictions to each other. But you see, there is no absolute truth, so whatever is true for you is true. So you could tell an outright lie, but if it's true for you, it's true. That's why it is... Oh, absolutely. Situational ethics has replaced. And as soon as Darwinism was in and morality was redefined, then what they did when I was in school is part of our education as a student in California grade school was to do situational ethic practice. People who claim truth only think they're true. They only believe that it's true. And so various people groups and perspectives should not argue and debate their disagreements, because there is no truth to be discovered, and to assume otherwise only leads to conflict and prejudices. So we aren't even going to talk about these things that are what you think is true and not true. That's true for you, and if it's not true for someone else, then that's not true for them. And we're not going to debate these things. It's purposeless. All it's going to do is cause problems. And that's really the only absolute thing that we can know for sure, is that there is no truth. So the only absolute is that there are no absolutes, but that does create a problem. Because if the only absolute is that there are no absolutes, and you believe that absolutely, then by definition you are intolerant to everyone who says there are absolutes, which would make you intolerant even to yourself. We have a population now. We have a population since the 50s that is less and less and less and less churched, to the point where we have 50 kids on a Wednesday, and 40 of them have never seen a Bible. But it's becoming a very small minority. Let me move to two more spots that we'll end our evening on, because this is just by kind of like, this is definitely cliffhanger. We're kind of working our way through, because I wanted you to see there's the progression, and I'm not a person who's been able to give you the most factual details, but I think we all can realize there's been a progressive movement. It's been choreographed. It's been very brilliantly put together by first eliminating and having a counter understanding of origins and how we got here. And when Darwinism became the religion of the land, and in our schools mainly, that was the great crumbling of a foundation that we've been suffering the consequences of ever since. Those scope trials, it's absolutely spiritual warfare, absolutely. But because we can no longer govern ourselves, because we have no morality and no absolute truth to base our governance on, there is only one alternative other than anarchy, and that is civil government and the rise of a more and more powerful government, not just state and national, but world government. The rise of, because liberalism got a big foothold, because what liberalism believed was that the more government gets involved, the better the outcome will be. And so liberalism was the advancement of a bigger and bigger slice of everything by the government, because they believed, and I think honestly so, many of them really believed they could do a better job of managing your money for your Social Security than you could. They'll do a better job of teaching your kids sex education than you can. They'll do a better job of feeding your kids lunch than you can. Liberalism had and breakfast now, and meals on the weekends, all summer right now, because they really believe, I don't have anything against most liberals to some degree, and we're going to talk about the difference between liberals and leftists, because your son has not become liberal, he's become a leftist, and we'll talk about the difference of those, because liberals really had a good heart. I mean, I think the New Deal, that was a good, there was some compassion on that, because they honestly believed they could do a better job. However, what has happened is that liberalism, classic old liberalism, has been ambushed. We're ready, David, for that video.
What's the difference between a liberal and a leftist? This question stumps most people because they think liberal and left are essentially the same. But they're not. In fact, liberalism and leftism have almost nothing in common. But the left has appropriated the word liberal so effectively, almost everyone, liberals, leftists, and conservatives, thinks they are synonymous. But they're not. Let me offer you 6 examples. 1. Race. This is probably the most obvious difference between liberal and left. The liberal position on race has always been A, the color of a person's skin is insignificant, and B, those who believe race is significant are racists. Meanwhile, the left believes the very opposite. To the left, it's the liberal attitude toward race. It's unimportant. That is racist. That's why the University of California officially lists the statement, "There is only one race, the human race," as racist. And liberals have always been passionately committed to racial integration, while the left is increasingly committed to racial segregation, such as all black dormitories and separate black graduations at universities. 2. Capitalism. Liberals have always been pro-capitalism because liberals are committed to free enterprise and because they know capitalism is the only way to lift great numbers of people out of poverty. It is true that liberals want government to play a bigger role in the economy than conservatives do. But liberals never opposed capitalism, and they were never for socialism. Opposition to capitalism and advocacy of socialism are left-wing values. 3. Nationalism. Liberals believe in the nation-state, whether that nation is the United States, Brazil, or France. But because the left divides the world by class rather than by national identity, the left has always opposed nationalism. So, while liberals have always wanted to protect American sovereignty and borders, the left is for open borders. When the writers of Superman were liberals, Superman was a proud American whose very motto was truth, justice, and the American way. But that all changed a few years ago when left-wing writers took over the comic strip and had Superman renounce his American citizenship to be a citizen of the world. The left has contempt for nationalism, seeing it as the road to fascism. Better that we should all be citizens of the world in a world without borders. 4. View of America. Liberals have always venerated America. Watch American films from the 1930s through the 1950s, and you will be watching overtly patriotic, America-celebrating films, virtually all produced, directed, and acted by liberals. Liberals were quite aware of America's imperfections, but they agreed with Abraham Lincoln that America is the last best hope of Earth. The left, however, believes the left is the last best hope of Earth and regards America as racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, violent, and imperialistic. 5. Free speech. No one has been more committed than American liberals to the famous statement, "I wholly disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." But the left is leading the first widespread suppression of free speech in modern American history, from the universities to the tech companies that govern the internet to almost every other institution and place of work. Of course, the left claims to only oppose hate speech, but putting aside the fact that the left deems hate speech anything it differs with, protecting what you or I might consider hate speech is the entire point of free speech. 6. Western civilization. Liberals have always championed and sought to protect Western civilization. Liberals celebrate the West's unique moral, philosophical, artistic, musical, and literary achievements, and have taught them at virtually every university. The most revered liberal in American political history, President Franklin Roosevelt, often cited the need to protect Western civilization and even Christian civilization. Yet when President Donald Trump spoke of the need to protect Western civilization in a speech in Warsaw, the left-wing media, also known as the mainstream media, denounced him. They argue that Western civilization is no better than any other, and that Western civilization is just a euphemism for white supremacy. So then, if liberalism and leftism are so different, why don't liberals oppose the left? In a nutshell, because they have been taught all their lives to fear the right. But as one of the best-known liberals in America, Harvard Law School professor Alan Dershowitz said, "As a liberal, as an American, and as a Jew, I far more fear the left than the right." Dear liberals, conservatives are not your enemy. The left is. I'm Dennis Prager.
Close our time with this, and I left it blank because I wanted it to kind of be because where we're moving is no longer conservative liberal. We're moving to leftist. We're becoming a leftist country. A survey that was released this last month, this year, some of their work, and they discovered that 70% of millennials, that's your grandkids, and some of your kids, are more likely or extremely likely to vote for a socialist. How did we get here? This is part of it. I'll explain the rest. We'll talk more next week. And then the hope is to come to where Brad's point was in all of this setting us up for end times. And with all of these things in mind, our response is not frustration and anger. I hope I can give you what I think all of our response needs to be, because there has always been, and there still is only one answer, and that is found in the person and work of Jesus. And that's what we need to keep concentrating on, and we won't get there for another couple of weeks. If this raises questions, jot them down. We're going to be talking about some other things of how the school system has contributed. So here's how it happened in my mind, how socialism got a really good foothold. First, it didn't go after the kids. Socialism did not start with the children. It started with the senior citizens. Then it went to the college students. Then it went to the children. Social Security, All of those Medicare, Medi-Cal, all that was the first steps. They got the senior citizens. Then they got the college students because they could get all the college professors moving their direction, and they grabbed all the colleges. Then all of those kids that came out of those colleges, because I had a really beautiful UC Berkeley teacher when I was in grade school, indoctrinated in the 1960s in UC Berkeley as my third grade teacher, and her job was then to indoctrinate me as one of the children on what she was taught as a college student. So they started with the seniors. Then they got the college kids, because the college kids could get in the schools, and then they could control the schools and take them over. So we'll talk a little bit about that next week. If you have any questions, write them down. We'll start off with questions next week. We want to go through this a little more, and maybe I said something that jogged your thoughts. Write it on here, and the very first 5 or 10 minutes next week, we'll have a little question and answer time. And I might not have the answers, but some of you might, because you'll have a more perspective than I do. Great. Thanks for being here.